Welcome. I'm Robert Balfant, the director of the Everyone Graduates Center at Johns Hopkins University. And we're here today to introduce the GRAD Partnership and invite you to join us to work together to support and spread the next generation of early warning and OnTrack systems. I'm going to be joined in this effort today by Patricia Bolana, who is the managing director of the GRAD Partnerships, Carla Gay, who is the executive director, Innovation and Partnerships from the Gresham-Barlow School District in Oregon, and Elizabeth Kirby, who is the superintendent of the Cleveland Heights, University Heights City School District in University Heights, Ohio. We will, and what we're going to do here today is I'm going to kick it off and just briefly sort of level set us by talking about how early warning OnTrack systems work and their impact, and then making the case of why we need to work together now really to create a next generation of these systems. We're going to hear from the people that are doing this work on the ground and some of the lessons and the learnings they've had in implementing early warning and OnTrack systems at both the school and the district level. Then we're going to more formally introduce the GRAD Partnership and invite you to join and show you how you can do that. And along the way, we'll be answering your questions. Please use the Q&A to ask those questions. Ask them as they come up. We have a couple of places along the way where we'll stop and address them. Also, share your ideas and resources. This is really this community of practice we're trying to build here. And you can use chat if you want casual conversations amongst yourselves. We will be recording this session, and we will share the deck and the follow-up materials and the recording with everyone who registered. And we ask you then to share it with anyone else you think might be interested in it. All right, let's get going. So I want to really start by just talking a little bit about like the core idea of early warning OnTrack systems and the impact they can have. So if we go to the next slide, the really big idea here is to graduate high school, college, and career ready, students need to navigate several key transitions. They tend to be the first and the last years of how we organize schooling. So 6th grade, 9th grade, 12th grade. And to be able to learn and succeed in between those points, right? That's really how we know our kids are all on the path to being successful. And it turns out, we all knew this, but sometimes we just didn't have the means to pay attention, that students signal early and often when they are sort of on and off track towards these outcomes or that show they are successfully navigating these transitions. And it's everyday things that tell us this. How often they're able to come to school, how often they're able to focus in their class, how often they're able to get their schoolwork done. Those things together have become known as the ABCs. And the reason why those are so predictive of sort of student long-term success, when you think about it, right, is because to succeed in school, at least how we've currently organized it, you need to be there on a regular basis. You need to be able to focus in class. You need to be able to sort of complete your schoolwork. If you do those things, you typically will learn. You'll typically do well in your class, and you'll earn the credits you need to graduate. If something interferes with that, and if you think about it, really, this is where poverty and the pandemic do their damage, right? Because both poverty and the pandemic make it harder for kids to attend school on a regular basis, make it harder for them to focus in class, make it harder for them to complete their schoolwork. And that's why both those things can be so problematic as far as being able kids to stay on track. But if we pay attention to those signals, and it allows us to act early, right? Often when the issues are just happening, right? And often they're much easier to solve then than when they'll be able to manifest for multiple years. And by looking at those signals, we can better support students, either directly or by changing how we organize school to make sure that lots of students don't run into those same troubles in the future. And by doing so, really alter that trajectory through school and beyond. And as is importantly, right, by looking at the patterns and trends in that data, we can identify where preventative and proactive actions will really enable all students to succeed and thrive in school, right? Because in the most perfect scenario, with all our learning, we'd have very few kids falling off track, right? And we would have, from our learning, figured out what we need to do and adaptive ways to provide the environments and the systems and the supports all kids need to thrive, right? So the big idea behind all of that really is that two things are critical here. It's early, easy access to good data, so we can be proactive and act early. And we know that those signals matter, that we're acting at a point in time when it tells us that if we don't, like we may not have really good outcomes. But the real work and the real genius of this work and the real impact comes from the human systems we create to analyze, add on, act on, and respond to that data. And this really is where a final feature, I would say, of these systems and the power they have is this is really where we enable both educator and student and family agency, because it creates a space and a place where teachers can share their various insights into students, because each teacher learns a piece of a puzzle about a student, particularly in middle and high school when it's a more departmentalized structure and teachers just see kids for part of the day. But kids are different in different times of the day in different classrooms. It's only being able to pool that data that we get a full mosaic of the students' assets and strengths and challenges. And then by talking to students, their families, we get another dimension. And by pulling all this together, we're able to create much better customized and sort of fluid supports to really help that student, right? As instead of having a one size fit all. If you're absent, we do this, right? If you're not passing your class, we do this. And if we think about it, this all together makes us much more proactive and reactive and much more human-centered driven. Whereas traditionally, right, our secondary schools, our student supports were very reactive and very remedial, right? Not too long ago, maybe a decade ago, right? We didn't do anything about attendance in middle and high school until you triggered a truancy law. And then we sent you to the court. We didn't even try to deal with it itself in the school, right? And typically, we didn't worry about social emotional development and meeting your sort of out of school needs until all of that manifested in some behavior that got you suspended. And then we didn't really deal with that. We just told you to go away and we hope it gets better on its own. And then in courses, right, we said, well, we don't do anything until you fail. And then once you fail, we basically say, try again under the same circumstances. So you can see how this systems we're talking about, these early warning OnTrack systems, are a fairly radical departure from business as usual. And that has been, I would argue, a lot of the source of their impact and the thing we really want to learn and build upon in the next generation. So, next slide. So then you might ask, well, that sounds great. Why do we need a next generation of early warning OnTrack systems? And the reason is twofold. One is that first generation that many of you have used and have worked with and have was really focused right on high school graduation and preventing dropout. Sometimes very much focused on the 9th grade transition. In some cases, they also look like 6th grade transitions. That work still continues and is foundational to what needs to come. But when we think about it, the world has changed, right? In the past 15, 20 years, there has been a lot of change. And in this time, one thing that's happened for sure is that a high school diploma is no longer a ticket to adult success. 75% of good jobs with which you could support a family, now require a high school diploma and some sort of post-secondary schooling and training. Not necessarily a 4-year degree, but some sort of advanced degree or some sort of really industry useful and real certification. And because of that, right, the job of public education really has to be preparing each generation to support a family, to support the community, right? Without that, our communities are lost if that breaks down. So that tells us high schools are not the end point anymore for public education. They're still a stepping stone to something that comes after. And that's a big shift for really how high schools are organized and even what they think about. And then of course, the pandemic, right? And not only the pandemic's health effects, but its economic effects, its social effects, its human effects, has greatly increased the scale and scope of student needs. I don't need to recite the statistics. The folks on this phone have lived through this. They know it better than anybody could, but it's worth reminding ourselves that what this has done is twofold. One, in any given school, a much greater range of students on any given day has some needs that need to be addressed beyond just great instruction in the classroom, which is foundational, but there's other needs, right, that can get in front of that. And it's very dynamic. Kids can be okay one week and not the other, right? Because the pandemic is not done. Its impacts are not done, and its residual impacts. And also how those interact with like just the staffing that's available in schools, right? All of those things have created a very dynamic situation of student need, where there's a greater need than ever to sort of progress monitor everybody. And then the final thing is we've learned important stuff in the past 15, 20 years. And one of the things we've learned the most about is really the healing power of school connectedness and caring relationships. Really this fundamental foundational idea that when kids feel connected to school, when they feel there's an adult that cares and knows about them as a person, when they have supportive peers, when they feel like they're engaged in pro-social activities, when they feel they're welcome for who they are, they don't have to change who they are to be accepted, those kids will fight to get to school, right? And to succeed, right? Because it's such a positive environment. But the harsh truth is that is a minority experience for most of our students to have that level of connectedness. And there was a very recent CDC study, which we'll share, CDC study we'll share in the follow-up, that looked at high school kids during the pandemic. And it found that high school students during the pandemic, either in a virtual setting or face-to-face, reported there was still that caring adult at school, and they still had a supportive peer, two of the key elements of school connectedness. When that was true, those students also reported 50% fewer mental health issues, which is astounding, right? Just having those 2 points of human connection reduced mental health challenges by half. But the hard truth again was that only 47% of students reported having those connections, and only a third of minority students. So this is the other thing that's really central to this next generation, is we know there is a realm of human need and human power that was not necessarily captured by the first set of systems focusing really narrowly on preventing high school dropouts. And it's just, we just know more now, right? So it's those three things together. Kids have to go further. The pandemic has created greater needs for more kids and more dynamic and more diverse and more shifting. And we know more about the healing power of connectedness and caring is really the case for like now it's ripe to put all that together to create a next generation of early warning OnTrack systems. So next slide. And we'll not go into detail on this. You'll be able to see it on your own. But the key idea here is we're making that next generation early warning OnTrack systems in a way are really about creating student success systems, right? And some of that involves like extending our predictive indicators to also indicators of post-secondary success, not just high school graduation, and trying to make them as real time as possible. It's about that adult, that human system bringing in other data, social, emotional, school connectedness data, things they can collect, right, to help them shape and understand root causes and identify the best sort of course of action. It's about thinking about how we can use all these data to really organize the school for improvement. And finally, it's the recognition that we really, underneath all of this is the human system. And underneath the human system is a set of supportive mindsets that really sees this work as preventative, not reactive, as strength and asset-based, as empathetic and not stigmatizing, and really understands that educators, despite everything, the amazing resilience they've shown and fortitude, and it does not stop. But despite all that, they know they're doing that because they know they can play such a role in their student success. And we need to sort of honor that and build the work around that. So next slide. So a simpler way to talk about what we mean by this next generation is that it's really a way moving the focus from high school graduation to high school graduation and post-secondary success, from sort of progress monitoring struggling students to progress monitoring sort of all students on key predictive indicators. We're still, individual level interventions are still a heart and soul of this work. We're not, it stays there, but it needs, on top of that, we need a stronger preventative focus and a stronger sort of proactive organizing the school for improvement, using the data to sort of do those larger strategic changes. There was some early on, there was a lot about preventing negative outcomes. The cases we made now, we really want to use these systems to enable what we are for: belonging, connection, mastery, pathways to adult success. And technology is important. Sometimes we got so enamored by the technology and it's all about the best data system with the best bells and whistles and the best color coding. We need good systems, technology systems, but we also have to make sure we really focus on those supportive mindsets, the human piece of that, right? It's not just a technology solution. All right, next slide. So that really, to sum this up, that's why we believe now is the time to really, for all of us to come together, to use what we have learned, to build, create, develop, scale this next generation, to address the needs that we face now, the more complex, the more evolving, the more varied needs, And really this idea, if we really create a system where it just becomes normal practice to have these systems and to continually use and adapt and improve them, that's really how we can create this engine of really drawing all the capacity of our educators, our families, our students together, and to use the data to sort of drive the creation of systems that enable everybody to, not only get through the pandemic, but to thrive, right? So with that, we're gonna pause because that was fast and furious, the way we roll sometimes. And I wanna now pause and see if there are some Q&A questions or clarifications or wonderments from the folks who know this work as good as anybody out there on the call. And then after this, we're going to move to our panel and learn from our folks doing this work in schools and districts.
Bob, we don't have any questions at the moment in the Q&A. Oh, yeah.
We had to give them a moment to remember they could ask a question.
Yeah, good point. They're starting to come in. Bob, there's two questions on indicators. Metrics for post-secondary success, are we confident about how predictive they are?
Yeah. Okay, I'll start with that with you. So this is an emerging field, but collectively, I think what we're learning is that actually predicting success in a 4-year degree college can be predicted as well as, and in some cases even better than high school graduation. And there's a couple factors that matter, but if you wanted to put on a bumper sticker, it comes down to decent grades and challenging classes. So students that get, more A's than C's, more B's than D's, right? And end up with that at least a low B average. And it also matters that they've taken challenging classes, they've taken some AP or dual enrollment or things like that to give them a real taste of what college work looks like. In those circumstances, students that meet those characteristics, in some cities, we found up to 80% of those kids are earning BAs, right? Which is a huge high success rate. And of the kids that do earn BAs, only 10% were not getting good grades in challenging classes. They found some other path. They struggled and recovered and were able to go on. What's been more challenging, and I think Chicago's made some advances on this recently, is that at least in the data we looked at, it's harder to predict success in a 2-year college. Partly that's because, unfortunately, a number of our 2-year colleges have relatively low success rates overall. And if the overall rate is low, it's hard to find differences. But also, I think what it is when we think about it, when our kids go to community college right now, many of them are working, many of them are commuting, many of them are not getting good advising. The conditions under which they experience that schooling, I think sometimes can overwhelm differences in prior preparation, which to me is a good way to use that data to say, we've got to improve those systems at the community college level, right? It's almost a good warning. If you can't predict it, it means there's not a system behind, there's not a success system behind it.
Thanks, Bob. We have one raised hand that I just wanted to, Nicholas Barlow, if you want to come off mute and ask your question. That appears not to be working. There's some pretty technical questions. Here's a question that I think I'd like to put out there. Do we also want to move from focusing on struggling students to all students, which is something you mentioned, Bob? And any thoughts on how to use data to pull strengths forward and maybe even use those strengths to create support?
Yeah, and this is why I really emphasize the real power, and this is the human system. Because the people that are going to understand those strengths are the people that interact with the students. It's going to be the teachers, their parents, other student support staff in the school, the coaches, the ones the kids interact with. And that's the people we've got to ask to understand those strengths. And then yes, we should enter them into our larger system so we know where they are and other people can call upon them in the future. So everyone doesn't have to have the same conversation. But I really think where that work, and that I would argue two things. One, it starts with that human system. And I would say it points out that that's the thing for us to think an example where we need to work together, that unsolved problem is how do we create simple tools those teams could use to record that information in a usable and retrievable way. So that we can build on those conversations, right? And not always have to start them from scratch.
I just want to note for everyone that there's some answers also happening in the Q&A. So there's a lively conversation happening in the Q&A right now.
Okay. All right. I think go ahead. Is there one more, sorry. Sarah, or should we move on? All right. So I think what we'll do is we have a Q&A session coming up at the end, yeah. And keep sending those questions in, and Sarah will keep collating them. But now I'd like to move to our panel and really bring in the folks that do this work. Again, I want to introduce Carla Gay, the Executive Director of Innovation and Partnerships, the Gresham-Barlow School District, Oregon, and Elizabeth Kirby, Superintendent, Cleveland Heights, University Heights City School District, University Heights, Ohio. We have Ohio and Oregon in the house, and we're ready to learn from them. Welcome, Liz. Welcome, Carla. Where I want to begin, and I guess we'll begin with Carla, and then we'll go to Liz, and then flip it the next time. Is just tell us a little bit about your experience working with early warning OnTrack systems at both the school or the district level, and what you've learned from that.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Carla Gay, Gresham-Barlow School District in Gresham, Oregon, which is about 10 miles east of Portland, Oregon. And I've been involved in early warning systems at the high school level for almost 10 years now, first in Portland Public Schools and in the last 4 years in Gresham-Barlow. It's been an evolving experience of learning how to really leverage the concept of early warning systems. And in Oregon, we've reframed that, and it's called early indicator and intervention systems. That's what our chief education officer in the state, Colt Gill, has tagged it. So that is the term in our state. But the idea is the same, that we use the ABCs to identify areas for attention. What we have learned is that if you just focus on the students who require quote unquote intervention, you kind of miss the forest for the trees. And so the bigger picture is, if you have a high percentage of students who are showing some sort of need for intervention, it's more of an indicator of a health of the system and what the system can do to better engage and improve, and the system being the adults in the system, to better serve the students. It's not at the exclusion of doing individual or small group interventions and actions, but it really becomes a lot of staff, if all they're doing is looking at that high level data and not really looking at the percentage of students and who they are, then what we're kind of missing the bigger picture. So for example, we've been looking at what we would call our tier 1 or our universal practices. And when we look at attendance, behavior, and academics, and we say, how are our students doing across those spectrums, then we can get a sense of our overall graduation rate based on those data points. But what we find is that when we disaggregate that information by race and language and special ed status, that we find a much more nuanced understanding with that data that forces us to kind of dive down into the details of who is benefiting from our current system and who is not. And then what is our responsibility to both highlight the strengths of who is benefiting, but also to really address some of the root causes that we as adults in the system have perpetuated. So in our district, what that means right now at the high school level is that we've done a very deep dive into ninth grade OnTrack work that was supported by our state and our some funding from the state. And so we've adopted the University of Chicago model, variations of that in to have ninth grade houses. And when we have created the time and space for our teams to meet with fidelity around that data and dig into that data, we've seen a significant improvement. It also means that it is highlighted that we have a lot more to do to support our middle schools and then our upper grades beyond ninth grade. So I think I'll stop there.
Thank you.
There's a lot to say.
That was wonderful. No, that was some great insights we're going to build on in a minute. But first, I want to bring Liz in here so she can share a little bit of her experience.
Sure. And again, thank you for the opportunity. It's great to see friends who've been working on this work for decades. So Bob, we go way back. Sarah, we go way back as well. It's been interesting going from a big city with a real focus on this work to being in a district with one high school that's in a suburban or urban suburban area in a state that's different than Illinois. So it's been very interesting. I took a lot for granted as a practitioner and a leader. And so there's some great tools and resources that our teams have developed at our high school, but we've had to do that, kind of independently because we haven't had the power of a network, which is why the GRAD partnership piece is so important. So things like early and quick and easy access to data is incredibly important. And a lot of times, especially in smaller districts, people are figuring it out on their own. So to have kind of a research base to help support that work is essential. In addition, the opportunity to use the research to drive the work. So Bob, what you just shared about the need for a supportive peer in an adult in the age of COVID, that's the kind of research that teams need as they're working to build and enhance their systems to support students. That's the kind of research that people that are busy running schools don't have the time to do. So to have that as a part of the GRAD partnership is incredibly valuable. And then that notion of not thinking just about graduation, but post-secondary, also really important as well. And we know that, the research shows, as you shared, that a diploma is not sufficient for most of our students as it relates to life outcomes. But again, you hear this kind of messaging in bigger districts with multiple schools. When you're on your own, this is work that, the teams and the teachers and the administrators are understanding and using to drive their work, but having a greater umbrella is really important. We also have built on our work around supporting our ninth grade students by using the resources from the Network for College Success. Our team has actually gone and visited schools in Chicago, which I think is really important around building and developing these systems because you got to see it in practice, and have embraced the notion of things like B's or better as a focus for our students. But in addition, our district has been working over the past several years on incorporating systems like the post-secondary planning system, where we get snapshots of where students are all along the way, K to 12, around academic needs, behavioral needs, even needs around food security in order to support those post-secondary outcomes. I'm just excited that this partnership is out here for districts because it often is difficult to do this work unless you're attached to a big university or a well-known partner, and many schools don't have the luxury of that. So this is a great opportunity to make those connections.
Thank you, Liz. So what I want to probe a little more on, and there was a question in the chat that resonated with sort of what Carla was saying, and this is getting at some of like the broader value of early warning on track systems. I mean, there's a direct value and there's sort of an indirect broader value. And one of the things that came out both in the chat about using some data on students' experience in the classroom and how that can inform, sort of what we're thinking about, what improvements can be made to keep more kids sort of on track. And what Carla, you were saying almost gets us to this place where you could make the case that part of the next generation, which you can make it's been more implicit when you try to make it more explicit, is this idea that there's both, data on students that are on track, but also data is the school on track. right? Is the school doing some of the core things we know from evidence and research are sort of fundamental to creating that overall learning experience environment that we know drives student success. And I heard you sort of talking about that, Carla, and even in her way, Liz, you were bringing that up, but I just wanted to know if people want to like just build on that a little more about some of the values, the additional values of early warning on track, and where we might want to work to even make them more sort of explicit in the next generation.
Yeah, I would like to sort of summon a couple of theories that help support that idea of looking at the whole system and then drilling down into the individual students. And I think of it is when you look at the whole system, that notion that John Powell coined around targeted universalism, where the data tells us a universal story, but when we disaggregate the data, we also see where we need to target our strategies for the students for whom the system has not worked. And we need to know how, like, are we talking 5 students? Are we talking 5% of our student population who are not attending? Or are we talking 50%? If it's 50%, you're really talking about a different strategy than if you're talking 5%, because 50% means that the health of the system needs to change or shift in order to better engage. Your goal is still that all kids will attend 100% of the time. But if 50% of your students are not attending, and when you disaggregate that data, which 50%, that really helps you get to that notion of targeted universalism. So that's like using that ABC data, which is really, this is the other theory. Shane Saphir wrote a book called Street Data recently, and that is about the notion that street data, satellite data are the ABCs. It gives us this big 30,000 foot view that helps us kind of look down and see where the inequities in our system are. And then street data is that level, student level data of actually talking with kids, understanding their stories. Why are they not engaging? What is happening that is not working for them? And so I think if you use both that notion of like big picture data to identify where your system is not serving kids well, and then you use street data to help you figure out just why, the root cause of that, and figure out what the solution is. That's a way of that, using that big picture while also using and leveraging student voice and the lived experience of the students, versus trying to assume that we as the adults know the answer. What we as the adults need to do is identify that where the gaps are, but then we need to go to our students to figure out just exactly what those answers are. And that's how I think of it. And so that targeted universalism and street data.
That's great. That's a great bringing 2 ideas together to make even a more powerful one. Thank you so much. And that's part of the GRAD partnership, pulling that all together. Liz, anything you want to add on like the extended value or of early warning on track work, or ways to make that more explicit going forward?
Yep, I would say that kind of to the point around having a strong system in place. One model that I continue to rely on, although I'm no longer in Chicago, is the 5 essentials model, where you're looking at different elements of a school's structure. So everything from teacher voice and agency, expectations of students, feelings of safety, leadership, from the administrative level, like all those pieces are also important as it relates to not only implementing early warning systems, but seeing like outcomes attached to that too as well. And you can't underscore how important those pieces are, especially kind of connecting to one of the principles, the supportive mindset component. I think one thing we've learned with the work around graduation, we all know now how important the 9th grade year is, but 20 years ago when I first started doing this work, even I myself didn't really understand how important it was to understand that we had to support students as much as possible, as opposed to thinking you either make it or break it. That's just how it is in America,
Yeah, right.
So kind of all those components, but aligned to a system and something like the 5 essentials, where schools and districts can track performance over time aligned, are really important.
Yeah, no, that's so great. Yeah, and and pointing out that we have some of these pieces, it's connecting them, right? It's like, and that's really another, I think, another power of this next generation work. The last thing I'd like you to share, and just, you can just, brief top of mind, is that we know some folks have been working with early warning on-track systems for 15 years. And others, Liz, as you pointed out, sometimes in smaller districts or different parts of the country, not so much, and it's a relatively new idea. So for someone that was just starting out, a principal just starting out, a superintendent just starting out, and wants to really start to move towards having strong, early warning on-track systems, what's one of the things you learned along the way that would be a good piece of advice for them?
To Carla's point, you need the overarching data, but you also need that street level data, right? So as early as possible. But the beauty of a smaller system is, your middle school kids coming in for the most part that are coming into high school. So you can talk to the teachers, you can talk to the principals, you can talk to the deans, you can talk to the students. Those kind of pieces are really important. But as early as possible, being very clear on what you're looking at, what's important, how that translates into performance at your particular high school or set of high schools too, is really key, but also holding yourself accountable to specific goals around that work as well, because like anything else, there's multiple things that folks are busy about. And if it's new work, you have to socialize it, you have to reinforce it, you have to celebrate it, you have to be very repetitive, you have to be consistent, you have to use the research to guide your work, you have to revisit it, you have to keep talking. So there's a lot of pieces to it. Don't think it's easy. If you only have a couple of middle schools, one high school, it is not, because there are a lot of distractions that are happening. And, this is the summertime. A lot of this work does start happening now. People are also incredibly tired. Yeah. In May and June in schools.
Thanks, Liz. Carla?
Yeah, I would just echo what Liz said about like figuring out what you need to focus on and then focus on it. The other thing I would say is that we're in district that's also small. I came from a much larger district to our district, and we've done a lot of work to build our data capacity, but we have a long way to go and had to kind of figure out what is our focus. And so we have nested the notion of early indicator and intervention systems under multi-tiered systems of support. So MTSS is our and equity-driven MTSS is kind of one of our larger overarching efforts, and that's K-12, and that helps everybody kind of keep coming back to how does this fit under MTSS? What is the role? As far as our high schools go, one of our key challenges that I would just say is that time, and this is at middle and high school for any early indicator intervention system, MTSS, is you need time for teams to meet, because it is not just your administrator and a counselor sitting at a table. It is not just two people. You really need to have a team of people, because they bring different perspectives, different understandings of the students that you're talking about, different understandings of the practices that are in place. So finding that time for teams to come together to unpack the data, to discuss it, to talk about root cause, to come up with an action plan, even if that's, we're going to go do empathy interviews with 5 students who represent this population that we're concerned about. And then to decide what action are you going to take as a result of that analysis, that collective analysis. But what we find at middle and high school, one of our biggest challenges is just carving out and holding time for those practices and routines to take place, for teams to come together. We've been fortunate to have some state funds called high school success funds, and next year we're allocating some of that to our high schools. We have 2 comprehensives and a smaller focus school in our district, so not much bigger than where you are, Liz. And we are asking them to use some additional FTE to create embedded common planning time, so an extra planning time for our 9th grade teams only, so that they can collectively look at data during the school day. Otherwise, we're having to try to get teachers to stay after school or come in early. And it's very difficult to find that time. So I would say that's one of our biggest challenges, and it's possible, but it requires absolute commitment.
Yeah. Thank you, Liz. I think that was 2. Thank you, Liz and Carla. Those were all very, very insightful points, and just a make a transition from that last point, Carla, to our next section, that how it really is about a team. It's not about like individuals trying to figure it out. And I think that's one of the other big shifts, right? Is historically, student supports were a individual. There was a psychologist, there was a social worker, there was a mental health person, there was a dean of discipline, and they individually tried to support students that were in their domains. And as we know, if there's any sort of volume in a school, that individual approach is quickly overrun. And it's both overrun, but it also loses all those insights we talked about from everybody else that knows the student. Because a single individual cannot possibly know 500 stories in depth, but all the adults in the building can. So it is creating the systems that lets the adults share their knowledge along with the data to help guide the work in a team environment, and then finding the time for the team that really gives you the driver for almost all the impacts we've found. With that, I'd like to thank our two panelists, and we're going to now bring on the final section of our presentation today about how you can join the GRAD Partnership and we can work together to create this next generation of early warning on-track systems. So if we go to the next slide, where the GRAD Partnership started was a realization among groups that have been working for decades or more to work with districts and schools and states to figure out better ways to support students and create and work on school improvement, and really coming to the conclusion that given where we are and the challenges we face and also the amount of learning we've had, that really now is the time to come together and work collectively and collaboratively as opposed to just on our own. So very much like that scenario we talked about the school, right? Where everyone had their individual thing they were doing. It's much stronger if we can create the collective. That's where the GRAD Partnership started. So organizations like AAR, the Bar Center, Talent Development, and the Network for College Success, and Everyone Graduates Center, who've been working with districts and states and schools for 15 years plus on early warning on-track systems, and the Carnegie Foundation for the Advancement of Teaching, which has been doing the same for improvement science, and then the National Center for Learning Disabilities, and the Schott Foundation and the Rural School Collaborative, which have been really working hard to get better schooling for those furthest from opportunity, again, for decades or more, came to the conclusion that by working together around developing, building, spreading this next generation of early warning on-track student success systems, where really we are combining the work for this individual and the improvement of the school together in a unified way, was really the best way to make progress. But what we recognized is that was just very much the beginning, just a small nucleus. But for this to succeed, it has to be a much bigger collaborative, collective endeavor. So we also recognized we needed communicating partners to help us share some of that research and some of that finding. If we go to the next slide, and to get the word out about the value of these systems and how they can improve. And so we're adding we have a set of communicating partners to start, and we're adding more, and happy to have any and all folks join us in that role. And then we're also building out an advisory group, a practitioner-informed advisory group, the people that have been doing the work on the ground, right? To make sure we always stay grounded in what's actually going on and happening in our schools. But even that we recognize is just very much the beginning. And really what we need to succeed is everyone on this call and beyond working together in a much broader, collaborative, supportive effort to sort of build, develop, and expand this next generation of early warning on-track student success systems. And with that, I want to bring on Patricia Bellana, who is the managing director of that effort, for her to share with us all how we can join, how we can work together, and move forward. Patricia?
Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Bob, very much. Good afternoon, Patricia Bellana, and really happy to be with all of you today as we launch this exciting endeavor, the GRAD Partnership. I'm very conscious of the time, so I'll try and move through the next couple of slides pretty quickly, just to give everyone an opportunity to ask some questions. So really what I want to do is talk a little bit about why you may want to join the GRAD Partnership and how you can go about that. In terms of why, hopefully having listened to Bob and Carla and Liz for the last 30 minutes or so, that is already pretty clear. I just wanted to share sort of three reasons that you or colleagues in your network may want to participate in the GRAD Partnership. And the first is have access to really high quality tools and resources. The GRAD Partnership team will be producing a whole range of resources to support leaders and teacher teams as they take on this next generation OnTrack work. There'll be a series of self-reflection tools, self-assessment tools, and just a whole bunch of really helpful resources as you continue with this work or even start out with this work in your school or district. Secondly, participate in the GRAD Partnership community of practice, share and learn from your peers, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a second. And then thirdly, for districts and for schools and for intermediaries who may want some more focused or targeted support, there is a whole range of expertise and technical assistance available within the GRAD Partnership. You've heard the word collective used. I think Liz used it, and I heard Bob used it a couple of times. And the reason all this is possible is just by the collective nature of the GRAD Partnership. We can do so much more together with greater impact than if we work alone. And that's the unique thing about the GRAD Partnership, really just pulling or learning on our resources. And lastly, but very importantly, so much, all of the work of GRAD Partnership is predicated on the fact that we have a deep commitment, a deep and shared commitment to equity and to anti-racism. And firmly believe that every single student should have access to and deserve a really high quality education, enabling them to thrive not only academically, but also personally as well. So that is why join the partnership. Just in terms of the next slide, various ways that you can join the partnership. We'll just start with the right-hand column and then I'll work my way across to the left. So you can join the partnership, as Bob said, by being a communicating partner, and we're super pleased for those organizations that have agreed to do that thus far. If you're interested or you know of any other organizations who may be a really good communicating partner for this effort, please let us know. And really the purpose is just to use their networks to spread the message about the value of these next generation high quality student success systems. Bob shared that we already have an advisory council, 6 folks. I think most of you are on this webinar today, and I think we're going to be joined by a couple of others very soon as well. And that's just a really important group of folks to give us feedback on this range of self-reflection, self-assessment tools and resources that we're developing for our schools and for districts and for intermediaries. And also just the advisory council and advising partners are just really a wider lens for us into the field, and also can participate in our various learning forums and our various communities of practice. The middle column, we recognize the value of intermediaries and community partners and the really significant role that they can play in supporting implementation of these systems in their local districts and schools. And we really want to engage and work with these intermediaries and community organizations to build their capacity to do this work. And then, of course, we want schools or districts to engage with us in the partnership to ensure that all students graduate on time, ready for the future. I've already mentioned about the lots of expertise and technical assistance that can be tailored to meet the needs of respective schools, districts, and intermediaries, irrespective of where you are on that continuum of implementing this work. If you're just starting out, if you're reviewing where you are, or if you're coming in a little bit later on that continuum, we can meet any and all of those places on that continuum. So I think that's just a really important slide to say there's various entry points into the GRAD Partnership. And next slide, please. Yeah, so very excited to share the date of our inaugural GRAD Partnership Community of Practice. That is June 22. Please look out for that, and more information on that to come in the next few days. But the GRAD Partnership team really thinking carefully about the best structure to harness the power of this partnership and establish a forum where schools, districts, and intermediaries can come and learn together in a safe environment. So more information to come on that, but wanted just to put out there, June 22 is our inaugural meeting of GRAD Partnership Community of Practice. Next slide. So would love you to join us. Would love you to join the GRAD Partnership. Please let us know how you would like to participate. Our website is on the screen. Please take a look at that. My email is there, and would love to hear from you. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. I am conscious that we just have about 7 minutes left for Q&A, so just want to hand it back to Bob.
All right, thank you, Patricia. Sarah, do we have more questions in the queue?
Yeah. There's a question about how we can, do we see the need for, and how we can use student surveys like Elevate and Cultivate in an early warning system process.
Yeah, I think those are great tools to really perform that function we were talking a little bit about, Carla and Liz, with that. Like, we both want to understand where students are and sort of where the school is at, right? What are the early warning indicators for the school? Do we have engaging classrooms? Do students feel welcome in school? A combination of those school connectedness things, but also, instructional things. Do they, a classic one for high school kids, do they see a connection between what they're doing in school now and their future? Or do they just sort of see it as a disconnected thing we're doing because it's school, but it doesn't really connect to my future? So I think there's a number of things that one could get through surveys, and there's some good instruments out there. And to Liz's point, one of the roles of the GRAD Partnership is to share those tools, availability of those tools widely with everybody, because again, they're not as well known as they could be, and also to point out there are ways that you could just create your own survey. So one example I give is on that school connectedness, which is so powerful. It's 4 data points which schools can track. Does this kid have an adult that knows and cares about them as a person? If we ask all our adults, are there kids that none of them have that connection for? We would then find those kids. Do we see kids that don't have any engagement with peers of any kind, right, in our observations? And do we need to expand our sort of extracurriculars to make sure there's opportunities for everybody to participate, to create those connections? Are we having some sort of pro-social activity kids can be involved in? Do we have the capacity for that? And maybe through a short survey, do our kids feel they belong? So that would be a thing of where schools can collect that information in relatively simple ways that would deeply enrich their analysis of the best course of action to sort of address the indicator data they're seeing.
Thanks, Bob. There's another question: if, as early warning indicate, as the next generation student success systems are looking towards post-secondary success, is the GRAD Partnership engaging with higher education? Yeah,
absolutely. That's why we're saying we need to have this large partnership, right? And everyone has a role to play. And there's multiple ways for those institutions of higher ed to participate. There's a role to play in making sure there is a good transition between 12th grade and the start of that. Right now, we sort of, the K-12 system ends and the higher ed system hasn't begun. And in between that space, a lot of kids get lost, right? And so how do we create good unified systems? And I think, one place that I'm will we're really curious to follow up with both Carla and Liz on this, is that I do think it is in some of the smaller school districts that some of this might be more possible quicker, because it's a very tight local relationship between that, the 2 or 3 institutions of higher education that are nearby and those school districts, right? And how can they create better transitions? The other one I'll throw out there is that we often know that with this expanded amount of student need from the pandemic, that there's an increased number of students who would benefit from a tutor, from a mentor, from a success coach, from a post-secondary advisor to support the counselor. And one ready source of that is college work study students. You can do community service for work study. That's an allowed expense for work study. And to create those partnerships where college kids could come in and help the district with training and support, play some of those student support roles at the scale we need. And there's a really nice example that we'll share with people, that University of Memphis has a program called Peer Power, which has been operating for over a decade or more, where essentially they send their work study students to be 9th grade success coaches in local high schools to both sort of tutor and mentor kids and help get them through 9th grade. So I think there's a couple of critical ways that roles that higher ed has to play.
Thanks so much, Bob. I think we should probably wrap it right now because
Yep.
we've got 2 minutes left.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that was a great place to stop, because it really showed again the power of making these connections, both locally and nationally, right? To increase the web of supports for our students and to use that knowledge to help our schools to improve. And in a nutshell, I really think that's what we're inviting people to join us and partner with us with in this next generation of early warning OnTrack, is both how to use these systems to both create pathways to adult success for all kids, through high school and beyond, help navigate through the impacts of the pandemic, but also become a powerful tool of school improvement and community connections and collaborations, because it's really going to take all of that to really reach this shared goal of making sure that every student sort of thrives and succeeds in school and leaves high school with a strong and secure pathway to post-secondary success. And I just welcome everybody to join us in this exciting endeavor, and really look forward to working with everybody on it, because together I know we can do a lot. Thank you.